around, and where you do catch the sunshine, it will still be feeling pleasant and warm, but not quite as warm as it has done the last couple of days. Now through into the afternoon, we will still see a feed of showers move into western and northern parts of Scotland, but there'll be plenty of late evening sunny spells in between these. Across Northern Ireland, as I say, quite a wet afternoon here, so not really seeing much of that sunshine at all really, but plenty of dry spells across the north of England and elsewhere across central and southern areas of the country. Perhaps a bit more cloud across Wales. Once again, the odd spot of rain and drizzle here, mainly around hills, but otherwise plenty of dry weather to end the weekend. Now through into Sunday evening, the rain that's across Northern Ireland will push north-eastwards and later on feed into parts of Wales and the southwest, so quite cloudy and turning quite damp overnight. The driest and clearest of the weather is going to be in the far southeast corner, and that's where it feels a little bit cooler, but elsewhere we're expecting another one of those muggy nights ahead. So for Monday then, quite a damp start across parts of Scotland, northern England and parts of Wales too, but it is generally an improving picture as that rain turns showery through the course of the day. But these showers could turn quite heavy across Scotland and be quite slow moving, so some persistent downpours at times, but generally drier and brighter across the south. And looking at those temperatures, it will still be feeling pleasant where you catch the sunshine.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion, Mark Meets, and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Go and get another glass of that bubbly, you've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Well, we've got quite an extraordinary story to talk to you about now, because a triple amputee war hero is launching a bid to become the first to sail across the Pacific Ocean non-stop, solo and unsupported.
Craig Wood was blown up as a teenager by the Taliban in Afghanistan, but now he's hoping to change the perception of disabled people and raise money for other limbless veterans like himself. And Craig joins us now. Morning.
So, Craig, you are extraordinary. You are planning to take up to 80 days to sail from La Paz in Mexico to Japan.
Yeah.
How many miles is that?
It'd be over 6,000.
Amazing.
Amazing. And it will take you how long?
The minimum it's going to take me is 60 days. It could be up to 80. Yeah.
And that's on your own. You've done plenty of this before, haven't you? You've done lots of solo sailing.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of solo sailing, but not as big as this. It is the world's biggest ocean, after all.
And why that particular route?
I wanted it to be a challenge, not just for me, but for anyone.
Right.
So any able-bodied person can look at this and go, wow, that is difficult.
Yeah.
And so that was the main drive. Then it's become a bigger thing than that now. I'm raising money for charity, and I can truly inspire people to change their perception on what is possible for disabled people.
And if you don't mind, can we ask you what happened in 2009 in Afghanistan? What were the circumstances of your injury?
I was on a normal routine foot patrol. About 5 metres in front of me, a commando IED was triggered, and subsequently I became a triple amputee. Both legs above the knee, left hand at the wrist, facial injuries, etc., etc.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. Great to have your company again after my week off last Sunday. 2 months on from Rishi Sunak's disastrous decision to call an early election, Parliament has been officially opened by the King. Ministers have been appointed and MPs sworn in as Westminster adjusts to this new Labour government under Keir Starmer. I'm going to be speaking to Treasury Minister James Murray about the King's speech, the government's plans for your pension and why Labour hasn't been more ambitious on housing. I'll also be joined by Shadow Minister Andrew Griffith about the upcoming Tory leadership race. Who will be leader of the opposition? Tom Tugendhat, Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, or someone completely unexpected? I'll be speaking with the former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland about his views on crime and punishment in light of Labour's early prisoner release scheme and the appalling riots in Leeds earlier this week. I'll also be speaking to Sarah Elliott, spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK, about the attempt on Donald Trump's life and the US presidential election. And author Maureen Callaghan will join me to discuss her book, Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Don't go anywhere because we've got 90 minutes of fun-packed politics coming right up. Right, let's get stuck into the Sunday papers with Chief Political Correspondent of The Times, Aubrey Allegretti. Lovely to see you, Aubrey. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Good morning.
Right, let's talk about Rachel Reeves. We've got her writing an op-ed in the Mail on Sunday talking about growth being the big Labour agenda. I mean, they are literally gambling the whole house on growth. I can't find much in her opinion piece about how they're actually going to achieve it beyond this wealth fund. I mean, what's your analysis of what she's saying about the economy and what they can do?
Well, she's obviously only a few weeks into the job, but Rachel Reeves is having to grapple with some quite difficult decisions. I think the Labour understand now that they're not in opposition. They can't sort of snipe from the sidelines. They do have to make tough decisions, and there are trade-offs. And I remember back in November 2022, when Jeremy Hunt was Chancellor, he was echoing Nigel Lawson's call for a sort of big bang reset to kind of try and unshackle the banks, some deregulation, try and pump some money into the system. You know, it didn't necessarily work. So she's going to find it very tough, I think, coming into the Treasury, with lots of calls already for her to boost public sector pay. We know the independent pay review bodies are coming out in the next week or so. So, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on her, and she's going to have to try and finally balance sort of being a new broom who comes in, brings optimism and gives people hope and that they feel like there's a new government without sort of actually giving very much away.
And Labour seem to have put aside enough money to pay NHS workers and teachers, I think, 3% pay rise. They are asking, or at least the independent pay review body has recommended they give 5.5. It's almost the first test for Labour, isn't it? Because obviously, if they concede to those demands, the question will be asked of them, well, are you just always going to be sort of slaves to the unions, calling for more and more money? You've got Wes Streeting trying to negotiate with junior doctors who wanted 35%. Inflation's come down. They don't want it to go back up. And as the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, has pointed out this morning, you know, how are you going to pay for this? You've said you won't borrow more outside of very strict fiscal rules. You've said you won't tax working people more. And you don't want to be cutting government departments because then that will seem like it's austerity 2.0.
Yeah, exactly. She's going to have to really sort of finely balance this decision. I mean, when we were on the plane with Keir Starmer going to the NATO summit last week, I asked him about the issue of public sector pay. Are you going to give the unions what they want? And he was very categorical, no. So the independent pay review body structure is helpful for the government in that it's not sort of unions that make the decisions. Yeah. It's an independent body. And so they spend their time reporting. We know the outcome of, I think, 2 out of the 8 bodies for teachers and some NHS staff. There are still 6 more, but they're sort of around the 5.5% mark. Now, as you say, Labour had earmarked about 3%, and there's supposed to be this black hole of around £8 billion. So how Labour are going to fill it, they will have to sort of make that clear in the run-up to the budget in the autumn. Those are probably where we're going to see things like the sort of rise on VAT for private schools. Yeah. So other areas where they might start to increase taxes in order to claw back that money.
Let's move on to Lucy Letby, because she features in quite a lot of coverage in the Sunday papers this morning. We've got a Sunday Telegraph piece suggesting that nurses and doctors who wanted to support Letby in court and beyond were sort of gagged by the NHS. That's one set of allegations. Then this really interesting story about David Davis, the former Brexit secretary, who has taken up individual sort of causes where he's seen that there may be a miscarriage of justice taking place. Nobody at the moment, by the way, Aubrey, seems to be suggesting categorically that Lucy Letby could be innocent. They're saying that the evidence that was used to convict her could be shakier than we thought. What do you make of David Davis getting involved in this? Because it's risky for him, isn't it, for his reputation, if actually she's banged to rights. And let's not forget, she's been found guilty of killing 7 babies, of attempting to kill 7 others. She tried to appeal. That was roundly rejected.
So absolutely, I think, David Davis is a very respected sort of civil rights campaigner, and he says that at the very least this appears to be a mistrial. So, I think she's got some support from a prominent politician like him. And of course, his position means that he can sort of help her in a way that lots of other people can't. He has parliamentary privilege, which means he can say things in the House of Commons. He can ask questions, and those are sort of covered by privilege. So she'll certainly be very sort of supported, I think, by this intervention. There is a degree of, I think, introspection in the wake of the Andrew Malkinson case.
Yes.
And people just very tetchy about wanting to...
Just explain that, because people might not be familiar with Malkinson.
Of course. So he was a man who was wrongly convicted of rape in 2004 and I think spent 17 years in prison. So obviously nobody is suggesting sort of huge similarities between the two cases, but that having come so recently, there are people looking at this and saying, does the criminal justice system look at itself and can it be held accountable in the right points and in the right way? And that's what I suppose the issue is here.
Aubrey, you mentioned that you covered the NATO summit, so you would have seen Joe Biden up close and personal. Lots of coverage today about him refusing to step down. He's been tapped on the shoulder by Barack Obama. He's been tapped on the shoulder, it seems, by Nancy Pelosi. He's hanging tough, saying no. How did you find him at the NATO summit? I understand you were in the room, you were in the Oval Office when he met with Keir Starmer. How did he seem?
So he was pretty on good form in the Oval Office, and during their private meeting, that's the same way that Keir Starmer sort of described him. He was quite sort of relaxed. He made some jokes. We asked him questions about the football and coming home, which might not sort of be immediately apparent what we were talking about to the US president. He didn't seem confused by that at all. But certainly later in the day, when he made the huge gaffe about calling President Zelensky President Putin instead, there suddenly erupted this kind of fire in his belly where during the press conference he seemed to get sort of increasingly wound up and frustrated with, I think, what he felt was the really mounting pressure around him because the NATO summit was this big moment where all the world leaders gathered in Washington and it was being completely undermined and overshadowed by questions about his leadership. And that, I think, the fear of it being taken away from him was the moment where he really started to kind of come out fighting. But it seems now increasingly more and more senior Democrats said, we'll let him have his sort of moment, hosting the summit. We don't want to overshadow that. But I think now they realise there's a small window where now the Republicans have picked their nominee. They have around a month or maybe 2-3 weeks until the Democrats do the same. So if they're going to do it, they probably need Biden's buy-in, not least because of the monetary transfer. If you want to be able to sort of give all of the proceeds of your donations to a successor, you can only do it on the Biden-Harris ticket. So it's either going to have to be Kamala Harris or...
It's interesting because he seemed to kind of open the door to standing down in that interview that he did in America where he said, well, if medical circumstances meant that I would have to stand down. And I thought, oh, hang on, is this a change of tone? But now we're just seeing him digging his heels in. One to watch, and we obviously will be doing that on GB News. And then let's finally talk about the Sunday Telegraph story. Expenses cheats and sex offender MPs in line for taxpayer-funded pensions. I'd imagine that people watching and listening to this will be outraged by the idea of MPs, for instance, like Charlie Elphicke, Imran Ahmed Khan, who have both spent time in prison, then ending up with taxpayer-funded pensions. Elphicke in line for 22 grand a year. Imran Ahmed Khan is for less, £3,000, but still. Aubrey, what do you think?
It is quite shocking. I mean, I think people are remiss to sort of tamper with pensions because they're what we sort of rely on when we get into old age and retirement. But in these cases, there are people who have been jailed for offences, and the Commons is out of step with other public sector organisations. The Met, the NHS and the local government authority among those that do have the power to sort of take people's pensions away from them or reduce them if they're convicted of wrongdoing. And so certainly I think if people want to sort of look at this and say, well, it shouldn't be one rule for them and another for other public sector workers, they will feel that frustration. There's also, I think, a sense that some MPs think they're untouchable and that kind of once they've left office, well, if the voters turf them out, that's it. Actually, this would be a really good reminder to a lot of MPs that if they do misbehave when they're in Parliament, there are consequences beyond just the 5 years.
Aubrey Allegretti, thank you very much indeed for your opinions on today's newspapers. Lovely to see you in the studio. Thank you. Good luck with your week's work at the Times. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the new Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. I'm going to be asking him about those pay claims. Is he going to give NHS workers and teachers a 5.5% pay rise or stick to Labour's original plan of 3%? Stay tuned.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Go and get another glass of that bubbly, you've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Now, time for the best part of the show, our greatest Britain, where we share amazing people who do amazing things. And this week, that is Dr. Leo Cheng and Reverend Hilary Cheng.
Well, Dr. Chen regularly serves as a volunteer surgeon aboard the Mercy ships in West Africa and has recently served his 17th mission aboard the ships. He volunteers with his wife, Reverend Hilary Cheng, a Methodist minister in the UK.
Thank you for joining us, and what a privilege. So just briefly explain, what are Mercy ships?
Well, Mercy ship provide world-class surgery on the ship, and the ship then sail to these poorest of the poor country because there's no infrastructure to get road or rail there. And we offer free surgery and also education, training of medical staff, and partner with the local or the host nation to build up their surgical and anaesthetic services.
So how long have you been travelling West Africa? You go on all these different ships, different ports, and you treat the needy and the vulnerable. How long have you both been doing this?
20 years.
20 years?
Just over 20 years.
And you take the time to do this out of your own holiday from work. Why do you do it?
Well, because I'm indebted to the education in this country with all the qualification I get. And NHS is great. I love the NHS because without NHS, we see cases that we see in the low-income country. And I want to make use of my hand to help those people who have no way of helping themselves. Because the tumours, the deformities, not just a physical ailment, but it's being ostracised and die early, commit suicide because they've been ostracised by their family.
When you're on the ship, you are seeing the very worst that the country can offer. I find it a great privilege to work alongside these people.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on JB News. Lovely to have your company. I'm joined now by the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, the MP for Ealing North, who joins me from College Green. Lovely to see you, Mr. Murray. I don't think we've spoken on the show before, so welcome. Thank you. Can we kick off? I know you want to talk about pensions, and we'll get onto that in just a moment, but can we just kick off by discussing the independent pay review body suggesting this 5.5% pay rise for NHS workers and teachers? Labour have allowed for 3%. Will they move to 5.5%?
So there's a process that we need to go through over the next few weeks, and what the Chancellor has set out is that she is looking at the pay review body's recommendations, and she'll come to Parliament before the end of July to set out her response to them, and that will be in the context of public finances and the public spending inheritance that we have in government, because we know that the public finances are in the worst state since the Second World War. The Chancellor asked Treasury officials in her first days in office to do a thorough assessment of them, and that will be the context in which she'll provide an update to Parliament by the end of the month.
It's going to be really difficult for the Chancellor, though, to go against the independent pay review body when I remember countless occasions where Labour, when they were in the shadow cabinet, kept on talking about the importance of following the recommendations of the independent pay review body. So now you're in government, you're going to change that stance?
Well, there's a process, as I set out, and the Chancellor is looking at those pay review body recommendations. We know, obviously, that the response to those recommendations will involve a cost, but there is also a cost to not striking a deal, because if you don't strike a deal, you run the risk of more industrial action. There are problems in terms of recruitment and retention, and so there's a cost to that too. But all of this will be set out in the next couple of weeks before the end of July in Parliament.
But there's always going to be a cost of potential industrial action. That's how the unions operate. I mean, of course there's always a cost. That doesn't mean you have to do what they demand, even if they threaten you with strike action.
Well, as I say, the Chancellor has been very clear that she's looking at the pay review body's recommendations, and the process that she will lead over the next couple of weeks is to look at those recommendations, to consider the assessment by Treasury officials of the true state of public finances and public spending inheritance, and then set out her response to Parliament before the end of July.
What's your personal view, though? Do you think that NHS workers and indeed hard-working teachers deserve 5.5 or 3%?
Well, my personal view, and that of many of us in Parliament, is that we hugely value the contribution and the work that NHS workers have been doing, that teachers are doing, that police officers are doing across the public sector. In terms of the process for deciding our response to the pay review body's recommendations, I think it's not fair for me to say one thing or the other now when there's a process in train. And what the important thing for me to say is to support that process and say, look, let's let this process play out. It's only a couple of weeks until the Chancellor will make a statement to Parliament, and she'll set out her response to those recommendations in light of the public finances.
OK. You're making the case this morning that the new pensions bill, which was announced in the King's speech, will boost pension pots by over £11,000. How is that, Mr Murray? How will that happen?
So what we're setting out today is the impact that our reforms will have, both in terms of improving returns for pension savers, for pensioners, as well as boosting economic growth. Because we know that by the end of this decade, there will be around £800 billion of assets in defined contribution pensions. Now, we want to see that money working harder for pensioners, making sure that pensioners are getting the best possible return that they can, and that it's also more of it is invested in productive activities in the UK economy to help get economic growth up across the UK more generally. So our focus is very much on improving returns for pensioners who saved hard throughout their life, make sure they get the best possible returns on their pension savings, whilst also making sure those assets are invested in things which help the economy to grow, which benefits all of us across the UK.
OK, can you rule out further taxation on state pensions under a Labour government?
Well, look, the Chancellor will obviously set out all tax policy at the budget in the proper way, but we know that we've inherited a situation where the tax burden is at its highest in 70 years. We know that the previous government introduced freezes to personal allowances, which are increasing taxation on many people. We know that the tax burden is something that we want to be lower, but we are never going to promise any tax cuts or any spending decisions which we can't say exactly how they would be funded, because we've seen what happens when you make unfunded spending commitments. That's what Liz trusted, that crashed the economy, and that hurt people across the country, and people are still paying the cost now.
OK, so I'm sensing that you can't rule out taxing the state pension further than it is already because of the frozen tax bans. I say that because you have ruled out taxing working people, but there's a clear distinction there, isn't there? Because people who are taking their state pension aren't working people.
No, look, we stand by our commitments that we made in the manifesto around not increasing income tax, national insurance, VAT. Obviously,
what about pensioners
will pay, in some cases, income tax, and pensioners would pay, VAT obviously when they're buying items. Pensioners could pay income tax on their pensions, depending how much pension they're receiving. But we need to level with people and be honest about what we've inherited in terms of the personal allowance freezes, in terms of the dire state of public finances, in terms of the very difficult state of public services. We need to be really clear about that whilst making sure that we get the economy growing. And actually, to come back to the earlier point you and I were talking about in relation to pension reform, it is about increasing returns for pensioners to make sure they're in a better position in terms of having a higher income when they retire. But it's also about boosting investment, which gets the economy growing, which is so vital to get us out of the doom loop that we've inherited from the previous government.
Just out of interest, how long are you going to be banging on about the legacy you've inherited? And when will you start taking responsibility for your own fiscal decisions? Just so our audience can know, have we got a year of this or 2 years or?
Well, I think that's for the general public to decide, but I think that everyone acknowledged during the election campaign what a difficult inheritance we would have as a result of decisions and failures by the previous government. And I think what we want to be is honest and upfront about that. So when the Chancellor comes to Parliament by the end of the month, as I mentioned earlier, she will set out the true state of public finances that we've inherited. And I think it's really important for us as a new government to be really honest and transparent about what the state of those public finances are, what tough decisions that will entail, whilst also setting out our plan to get the economy growing, to put us in a better position as a country and make people across Britain better off.
While we were talking about pensions, there's a story in the Sunday Telegraph, Mr Murray, about MPs who have been convicted of sex offences and indeed those who are expenses cheats getting their state-funded pensions. Charlie Elphick, for instance, is in line for 22 grand a year. Imran Ahmed Khan could be getting 3 grand a year. Should Keir Starmer step in to stop this?
Well, look, I mean, the actual question about pensions is going to be quite an involved question, I expect. But I think more broadly, you know, when you hear that, you feel that people should be held to higher standards. And actually, one of the things that we made very clear during the election campaign is that we want to improve standards in public life. We want to improve the ethics and behaviour of MPs. And that's something which is very central to our work in government now that we've been elected.
So Starmer should put a stop to it then? If he's all for ethics and holding MPs in a higher regard, he should step in and stop this. Convicted criminals getting taxpayer-funded pensions.
Well, I'm not going to prejudge the specifics of that situation, but the broader
I'm just
point
asking
is
if you
very
think Keir Starmer should step
which
in.
Is that, well, there are specifics that I'm not going to try and work out live on air. But I think the point more generally, which is an important one, is that Keir Starmer has made very clear about the fact that MPs' behaviour and standards in public life have been really damaged in recent years. The perception of MPs has been really damaged as a result of bad behaviour and a lack of integrity amongst many MPs and indeed government ministers in the previous government. You know, Keir Starmer brings a real sense of public service to office and the fact that people should behave absolutely in line with the highest standards of conduct, and that will guide his time in government and our time as a Labour government.
Could the King's speech have been more ambitious on housing, Mr Murray? You set that target of 300,000 new homes a year, but of course that just echoes David Cameron's target of yesteryear.
Well, I think the King's speech was incredibly ambitious when it comes to housing. You know, that may well be a target that others have spoken about in the past, but they've never delivered it. And the difference for us is that not only are we setting a target, but we're taking some of the tough decisions to actually make sure it gets delivered when it comes to planning reform, for instance, making sure that those housing targets are set again for local authorities, making sure that we work with local authorities about where to build, about how housing is built, but it's not a question anymore of if housing should be built, because housing has to get built. We have to try and break out of this cycle that we're in now, where people can't afford a home, people can't afford to buy their first home, people are paying expensive rents and they can't look after themselves and their family. We have to break out of this, and that does mean taking tough action.
Why wasn't votes for 16 and 17-year-olds in the King's speech? Have you abandoned that pledge already?
No, it's still a pledge in our manifesto and one that we have in government. But obviously there was, I think, 35, 40 bills in that King's speech. It's a pretty busy King's speech, and there are certain measures we need to get on with really urgently. Whether that's about the asylum and immigration system, whether it's about economic growth, whether it's about the railways. There's plenty of stuff that we need to get on with urgently, and that was what was the focus of the bills in the King's speech.
On that note, when are you going to strip private schools of their VAT status? There's a story in the Sunday Times this morning suggesting that that will kick in January. Can you give us any further details on the timing, please?
Well, look, all the details will be set out by the Chancellor when she speaks in Parliament in the normal way. So we'll see the details about her plans, and obviously in the budget in the autumn there will be further information about across a whole range of policies. But we want to make sure that we're doing the process properly. We will develop our plans that were our manifesto commitments, and then the Chancellor will set out what our approach will be.
Under your new deal for workers, you're hoping to increase the minimum wage. To what?
So the level of the minimum wage is one which is determined by the Low Pay Commission. But what we want to make sure is that the national minimum wage is a real, genuine living wage. And that's why we want to change the remit of the Low Pay Commission to consider the cost of living for the first time. Obviously, they will come up with a recommendation based on all of the different factors that they consider and have done for many years. But we think it's important that the cost of living is taken into consideration by them too.
Can you rule out businesses going bust if they can't afford to pay their workers more? Very briefly, Mr. Murray.
Well, the Low Pay Commission is responsible for making recommendations about what the national minimum wage should be, and they take into consideration a whole range of factors when they set that level. So it's really a decision for them, but it would be for us as a government to make clear what their remit should be.
OK. Mr. Murray, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Great to speak to you.
Thank you very much.
Not sure if I got many answers to my questions there, but we continue to plug away as ever. And coming up next, I'm going to be joined by Tory Shadow Minister Andrew Griffiths about the upcoming leadership hustings in his party. Which Tory can unite the right? And I'll be asking former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland why Britain seems to be becoming increasingly lawless. You won't want to miss either of these two interviews, so do not even think of going anywhere. And later in the show, I'm going to be discussing the Kennedys with an author who's written a book about how badly they treated their women, which will be a compelling watch. See you in a jiffy.
Don't miss your chance to win our Super Summer Giveaway. With your chance to win £30,000 cash, our biggest cash prize to date. Which means you get to spend every single penny however you like. What plans would you make with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank account? Take your family on the ultimate holiday, buy that treat that's always seemed out of reach, or just put it in the bank for a later date. However you'd spend it, make sure you don't miss out. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Should Prince Harry have accepted an award named after a US war hero at a glitzy ceremony last night? People begged him not to, but he did it anyway. It's time for tonight's head-to-head. Well, Prince Harry paid tribute to the eternal bond between mother and son as he appeared alongside his wife, Meghan Markle, at the glitzy ESPY Awards, dubbed the Sporting Oscars last night. The Duke accepted the Pat Tillman Award, named after a US war hero, for his Invictus Games work. But Harry's decision to accept the award was shrouded in controversy after more than 76,000 people signed a petition demanding he reverse his decision. Well, speaking last night, Harry paid tribute to Pat Tillman's mother, Mary. But that comes after Mary Tillman slammed his decision to give Prince Harry the gong, saying, "I am shocked as to why they would select such a controversial and divisive individual to receive the award. There are recipients that are far more fitting. These individuals do not have the money, resources, connections or privilege that Prince Harry has." So tonight I'm asking, Should Harry have actually accepted the award? Let me know your thoughts. Go to gbnews.com/your say. Tweet me at gbnews and make sure you take part in our poll. But going head-to-head on this now, a former Royal Butler, Grant Harold, and the journalist and broadcaster, Laurie Turner. Thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. Laurie, I will start with you. I mean, the mother didn't want Harry to have it, but he did it anyway. What do you think?
I just think it's incredibly tone deaf. He seems to have an amazing ability to not read the room. It wasn't like this was a surprise because the opposition to him getting this award had been growing. So he had the chance to say, actually, I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to accept the award. But he didn't.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. So much more to come on today's show. I'm going to be talking about the Conservative leadership race with two Tories, one currently serving, one past. So that should be interesting. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Good afternoon. It's 10 a.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top story. In the US, Donald Trump says nobody warned him of a possible threat in the moments before he was shot by a gunman in Pennsylvania. In an interview with Fox News, the Republican nominee said the lack of information was a mistake and the event should have been delayed. It comes as the Secret Service faces questions over how the would-be assassin was able to wander outside the security perimeter before taking his position on a roof, even after local officers had reported him acting suspiciously.
Nobody mentioned it. Nobody said there was a problem. And I would have waited for 15. They could have said, let's wait for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes, something. Nobody said, I think that was a mistake. How did somebody get on that roof? And why wasn't he reported? Because people saw that he was on the roof.
Well, meanwhile, Camilla Harris insists President Biden will win the US election, despite continuing pressure from fellow Democrats to stand aside. The vice president was making the case to stick with the 81-year-old, even as some big-money donors expect him to end his campaign. She's increasingly being seen as a possible replacement for her boss, though former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is understood to be calling for a competitive process to select a new nominee. Speaking at a fundraiser in Massachusetts, Kamala Harris admitted there's a tough road ahead. Well, back here, the Chancellor says she's hoping to boost our pension pots by £11,000. Rachel Reeves believes a review of retirement savings could unlock billions more in investment, with schemes encouraged to invest in assets such as infrastructure. The Treasury says it would boost economic growth and ensure better returns for savers. James Murray is Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. He told GB News that smarter investments can help grow the economy.
We know that by the end of this decade, there will be around £800 billion of assets in defined contribution pensions. Now, we want to see that money working harder for pensioners, making sure that pensioners are getting the best possible return that they can, and that it's also, more of it is invested in productive activities in the UK economy to help get economic growth up across the UK.
The SNP is urging the Foreign Secretary to suspend the sale of arms to Israel. In a letter to David Lammy, the party said the government should take action now rather than wait for further reviews. Mr Lammy has said there will be no blanket ban, but he will consider issues linked to offensive weapons being used in Gaza. The SNP says there's been 9 months of reviews into Israel's compliance with international law, and there's no need to wait for another one. Well, if you're thinking about spending your Sunday finishing off that long-delayed DIY project, you might want to think again. Botched DIY jobs are costing homeowners hundreds of pounds to fix. According to a survey, 20% have to fork out an average of £329 to remedy mistakes. 38% say they've been inspired by TV programmes to get stuck into their own projects, with adults aged 34 and under the most likely to pick up the hammer. OK, those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Ray Addison. More in around an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lots more still to come. Let me take you through the menu. Got a right smorgasbord on this morning. So I'm going to be speaking to Tory Shadow Minister Andrew Griffith in just a moment about the leadership race, who should be the next leader, what's the talk of the Tory tea room. He's currently in place, so that's good to know that he's still an MP. But we're also going to be speaking to former Tory MP, former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland. I don't just want to talk to him about whether it should be Kemi or Suella or whoever, also talk to him about just lawless Britain and particularly get his reaction to the riots in Leeds earlier this week. And Sarah Elliott is coming in. She's of the Republicans Overseas UK group, and she's going to discuss the attempt on Donald Trump's life, Biden hanging on in there, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for Trump's campaign. And I'm also going to be speaking to the author Maureen Callaghan about her new book on the Kennedy family and how badly people like JFK treated the women in their lives, most notably, of course, Jackie. But first of all, Andrew Griffiths joins me now. He's the Conservative MP for Arundel and South Downs and Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. Andrew, thank you so much for your time this morning. Much appreciated.
Good to be with you.
Let's talk first of all about a story that is suggesting that the Tories are bankrupt and actually it's going to be very difficult for you to fund a long leadership race because you're in this limbo period where if you don't have a leader, then you can't get in the donations. You've obviously spent a lot of money in the election. There's not much in the war chest. Does this mean that it should be a shorter leadership race or a longer one? What's your view?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we get it right. We've got a job to do immediately to oppose this government. That's why we've now got a full shadow cabinet formed. You can see Rachel Reeves is out touring the studios this morning, denying the state of the strong public finances that we've left and rolling the pitch to break Labour's promise not to put up taxes. So there's a job of work that needs to be done right now, and we are out there doing it. Now, the most important thing about any leadership contest is that we get the right leader for the right phase. Now, sadly, we're going to have the luxury of some time in opposition. That was the message we heard loud and clear from the British people. So we've got some thinking to do. We've got to reflect on the results. And, I would favour taking the right amount of time to do that. The price for a leadership contest is relatively modest in the context of getting the right leader for this important period of opposition.
Some of the candidates that have sort of been hinting that they're going to stand. I mean, I think in the last week we've had reports that Tom Dugandat will stand. We've then had Steve Baker and Damien Green, the former Tories, support his candidacy. We've had hints that Priti Patel is going to stand. I think Suella Braverman has made it pretty clear that she's going to stand. We've also heard about James Cleverly. We've got Robert Jenrick with his new haircut and a little bit of weight loss suggesting that he might stand. Is this all just too soon? Because you don't seem to have worked out yet what quite went wrong and how on earth you're going to be even near being re-elected come 2029.
Well, that's the most important point to me, which is the time to reflect and really understand what it is that the British people were telling us. I think a large part of that was about the competency. It wasn't about necessarily them falling out of love with the idea of Conservatives that want to keep people's taxes low, allow them to keep more of what they earn, spend public money wisely. But there's clearly some messages that we have to take away from what was a very significant defeat that regrettably cost so many of my former colleagues their places in Parliament. So you are right. We need to learn those lessons and not rush too quickly, in my view, into an immediate selection contest about the answer. Ultimately, these are decisions for other people to take. The party board, the 92 committee will represent the views of members of Parliament such as myself.
But is your instinct, Mr Griffith, that maybe the leadership race should wait until after the Tory conference in the autumn? Is that your sense? It's just a couple of the grey hairs have said that to me. Ian Duncan-Smith currently being touted as a potential interim leader, David Davis. They're all saying, cool your jets, do not do anything on leadership until after the Tory conference.
Look, I suppose in that spectrum between short and long, I'm more of a longie. But look, this is in essence an internal leadership debate for us. Relatively small number of us MPs now. We can sort that out over the coming weeks and months. It's not for me ultimately to make those decisions. But there is that really important job, and I want to reassure your viewers that we're not taking our eye off holding this government already to account and holding them to account for their promises, particularly their promise not to put up taxes. Rachel Reeves is touring the studios, trying to roll the pitches, despite the fact she's inherited an economy which is one of the fastest in the G7, and all of the public finances, thanks to the OBR, are out there in plain sight.
All right. To be fair, Rachel Reeves wasn't touring this studio this morning. I'm not sure what she's afraid of, Mr Griffith. Some cold, hard questioning, perhaps.
Shame on the Labour Chancellor, and I'm always happy to come and talk to yourself and GB News viewers.
Good man. Now, Suella Braverman, she's argued that the Conservatives risk becoming centrist cranks. Is she right? Are you a centrist crank, Mr Griffith? In fact, are these interventions even helpful to the Tory cause right now?
Look, I don't think that's the number one thing that the British people want to hear from the Conservatives. They delivered a very clear message. They gave us one of our worst ever defeats. And a lot of that, in my view, was as much about our conduct as our policies. I'm somebody who's a low tax, traditional Conservative, if you like, who believes in a small state while still providing a basic level of public services. And I want to see taxes, for example, reduced, not increased, as Labour are threatening to do. I want to protect our countryside, and we're not hearing anything in the King's speech this week about protecting, our countryside and what the government plans to do for rural affairs and farmers. Those are my values.
That part of the problem? Isn't that part of the problem, that the Tories talk a good game on low tax and low immigration and all the rest of it, but 4 million people voted for reform because you didn't honour your 2019 manifesto promises? Instead of tax coming down, it went up. Instead of immigration coming down, it went up. I mean, you've got to address that, haven't you?
Look, I think we have. And that's why I said, it's important that we take time and listen to those lessons. That's not something that you would expect to happen overnight, and nor do I think it would be particularly credible if that happened within weeks rather than over months. That's a dialogue that we should be having. I'm not rising to the response to have that dialogue out here on the airwaves right now, because I think we should take some time to reflect. But to be clear, I don't think the rejection of the Conservatives was necessarily about our values and policies. A large part of that would have been about our conduct and whether people trusted us to deliver things that they themselves still understand, supported. None of which we must. The wrong thing to do would be to go into a self-indulgent, dialogue via the media, via the airwaves, at a time when Parliament has now been reformed. Everybody's taken their oath of allegiance. We've had the King's speech. The Labour government that is going to do, in my view, things that are detracting from the future prosperity and success of this country, has got a record number of bills of legislation, and it's really important we don't take our eye off the ball.
But further thought on that, because I didn't mention her earlier when I was listing some of the potential Tory leadership candidates, Kemi Badenoch. I mean, she really held Angela Rayner's feet to the flames earlier on in the week in the House of Commons. She is a good attack dog for your party in opposition. Would you like her to be leader? And if not her, who? To finish, Mr Griffith.
Well, look, I think Kemi's demolition of Angela Rayner with those terrible policies that could see our greenbelt and countryside and green spaces more generally being built on in an unthinking way, not the right homes in the right places. That was a really good example of opposition. So you're not going to draw me successfully on any one individual candidate. We're very lucky as a Conservative Party to have a broad field. But that was a good example of good opposition, holding the government to account. There's more of that needs to be done. In a way, we are at a moment of maximum danger in that the Labour government's come on in. Yes, they've got a majority, but only for things that were clearly in their manifesto. And the biggest thing that they promised was that they wouldn't be putting up taxes. Now, over the coming weeks, we're going to get a statement from Rachel Reeves. In the autumn, we'll get a budget. It's really important they're held to account. They promise not to put up taxes on ordinary people. That must be what they are held to account to do.
OK. Andrew Griffith, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Well, in just a minute, I'll be speaking to another Tory, a former MP. Next time, former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland. I want to have his thoughts on who should lead the Tories, bearing in mind he's worked with Robert Jenrick, he's worked with Priti Patel at the Home Office, so he's got a good insider view. He might be one of those centrist cranks that Suella Braverman talks about, but his opinion is valuable on that and also lawlessness in Britain, not least after those riots in Leeds. Don't go anywhere.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined now by Stefan Kyriasis to give us the latest on everything theatre.
So, yeah, we're going in first with Starlight Express, which is back. It's not in the West End. It's out at Wembley at the Troubadour Theatre, which is a big, almost kind of warehouse space, which suits because, as you know, have you seen the show?
Starlight Express was my first ever musical. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. I only saw it once, but I remember it being magical.
Well, this one, it's 1984 it started, and it's still running in Bochum in Germany in a huge arena. So basically what we've got, they've slightly tweaked it, and there's a little boy or little girl, depending on the cast, going to bed, obsessed with toy trains and dreaming of trains. Everybody is dressed up. To me, it looks like a cross between Tron and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I don't really think any of them look remotely like a train, but hey, the songs are Andrew Lloyd Webber. It's pop mixed with kind of cod 1950s rock and roll, some power ballads. The lyrics are politely like something out of an old speak and spell machine or something. You know, he's a steam train, they're out of date, he's being bullied by the diesel and the electric, and he falls for this carriage, the first-class carriage, new girl Pearl, and he wants to impress us, who enters a race, and that's pretty much it. And when the races happen, all these barriers come up around where we're sitting, the lights are flashing, the music's thumping. It's utterly ridiculous, and I felt like a kind of teenager that was huffing sherbet dib-dabs off a giant block of sugar. It's so much fun, and the really crucial thing about it all is that somehow, in the middle of all of that, I just felt myself getting into the story. And when Pearl and Rusty have their little duet, I was very moved, and there's this big starlight sequence, which is the inspiration, the magical starlight that he's seeking. It's beautiful.
GB News, the People's Channel. Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Sir Robert Buckland, KC, joins me in the studio. Unfortunately, he did lose his seat in Swindon South, but he's back with a vengeance to discuss the Tory leadership and other matters.
Yes.
Let's discuss a really important story just in your capacity as a former Justice Secretary and indeed a lawyer, Sir Robert, and that's the riots in Leeds, in Hare Hills, that we witnessed last week. I mean, I've written a column on it, and of course it's been lampooned by the left on social media because you can't possibly have anyone criticising the state of things. I've said in this column, which was headlined, I don't write the headlines, but it's basically making the point, Britain stands on the brink of a terrifying new era of violence, crime and disorder. And I said that not just on the basis of what happened in Hare Hills, but also the intimidation that Jonathan Ashworth faced, this idea that criminals are getting off lightly, you know, questioning of the verdict given, the sentencing given to the Roger Hallam of Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. All of it serves to sort of undermine good, solid law and order in this country. But on the riots, what's your analysis of what happened?
Well, it looks as if an issue relating to the taking of children into care then gets escalated and exploited by people who want to create trouble in that community. That's what it looks like.
People were making the point, Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson were saying, oh, it's got something to do with sort of racial divides. I don't think that's what it was. It was actually just pure thuggery. But it's a terrible thing that people can jump on the bandwagon of an issue that has involved the police and then basically run rings around them. I mean, the police went into retreat. Suddenly a bus is set on fire. I mean, I don't want to be harsh to West Yorkshire Police because those officers are brave people doing a good job. They're inside a car that's being rocked by a mob or whatever. But as soon as the police retreat, then it just allows mob rule to take over, doesn't it?
Well, look, that's the problem that they faced, and it does seem to me that forces across the country need to be as resilient as possible to deal with sudden escalations. This looked like one of those cases where suddenly, without warning, it got out of control. And, you know, for all of us across the country, that is something that we'd all be rightly worried about. I think you're right. I don't think this was something racial. Having read through all the reports, it does seem to have arisen from a particular case. But there's no excuse for this sort of mindless violence. You know, most of us in this country are law-abiding citizens. We play by the rules. And I think we're right to get increasingly fed up when we see people who sometimes get away with it or behave in a way that there doesn't seem to be any redress for. That's something that we've got to, you know, rigorously crack down on.
Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley said this week that he felt that the force was under-resourced. They've got a recruitment crisis, can't attract new people to the police service. As I made the point in my column, you know, in the old days, people grew up wanting to be police officers. Nowadays, kids grow up wanting to film them on their mobile phones and post it on social media. That's a problem. But can't we trace this back to Tory cuts? I know it's awkward, but when Theresa May took a machete to police numbers, we're still feeling the ill effects of that today. That was a terrible mistake by the former Home Secretary, wasn't it?
Look, I remember being there at the time, and I think it's right to note that overall violent crime in our country has fallen, and that's a welcome thing. We don't see the sort of, you know, gang thuggery that we often used to see on our streets after people were drinking 9 pints and going out and causing trouble. That sort of behaviour has definitely declined. However, there are flashpoints, and it does seem to me that, you know, in this modern era, we're facing new threats, that we've got to make sure the police are ready to scale up in response to those incidents.
On that specific point, because I know you're a polite person, you won't want to besmirch your former Conservative colleague, but come on, let's just nail this down. She was wrong to cut police numbers, wasn't she?
Look,
it's come back to haunt us so many times.
I think that it's easy for me to sit here with hindsight and say it was wrong.
All right, well, we can use hindsight, that's fine. We admit that we are being correct after the fact. In hindsight, it was a mistake.
Look, I think there were a couple of things that went wrong. I think we lost numbers in police. We lost numbers of prison officers as well. That was a big problem.
Yes.
And we started to
Chris Grayling's reforms.
Yeah. And
so we have got two Conservative colleagues here who have shafted the system somewhat. Can we at least find some common ground on that?
I think there was a problem. I think then from the middle of the decade, and certainly when Boris Johnson came in, we started to scale it back up. And now, you know, we are at levels where we were.
Did she make a mistake?
Look, I think it's easy to apply hindsight. I think at the time we were trying to deal
did she make a mistake?
Look, I think
Come on, Sir Robert, you went into
look, do I think it was a mistake? I could say yes, it was something that perhaps we could have done differently, but let's not forget what we were facing back in 2010.
Yes.
You know, we didn't have many choices in terms of the fact there was no money.
Back then you were complaining about the economic legacy that you'd inherited from Labour. Right now we've got Labour complaining about the economic legacy they've inherited from the Conservatives.
I know, and we know that we've left this country economically in a better place than they did us in 2010. You know, all the figures that this month and indeed this year showing economic growth, inflation under control.
Really? Rachel Reeves is saying it's the worst economic outlook since the Second World War.
Well, in the words of Mandy Rice-Davies, she would say that, wouldn't she?
Indeed. Right, let's move on then to other matters, including leadership. We've had your former colleagues Steve Baker and Damien Green. I think the latter probably in your caucus of the party, a bit more of a one-nationer. They're supporting Tom Tugendhat. Are you bringing up the rear, supporting Tom Tugendhat as a future leader of this party?
Do you know what? I'm not supporting anybody
Oh,
at the
come
moment.
on, Sir Robert, you've got to play ball on this.
Well, I'm just a member now.
I know
and I have
you are.
a vote ultimately in
Should
the last
members
two.
retain a vote,
Of
by
course
the way?
they should, definitely. Now,
What's all this talk about MPs deciding and cutting out the grassroots?
Well, I think that's mad, especially when we've only got 121 of them. You know, I did describe this potential race as bald men arguing over a comb on election night. And, you know, I do want everybody just...
Bald men arguing over a comb?
Yeah, just...
All right, fair
I think
enough.
everybody should just calm down.
Yeah.
And remember, actually, playing this long is right. You know, back in 1997, you know, I think William Hague's a great guy, by the way, but, you know, I think that was too early for him.
Yes.
Ian Duncan Smith, you know, with respect to Ian, it didn't work for him.
No.
When we did go long, we elected David Cameron, of course, then became Prime Minister and took us back into power. You know, I think taking it longer, involving the membership in meaningful debate is absolutely the right way to go. You know, we want more members to join the party. We want the conference to be interesting.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
But when you say wait, do you think you should wait until after conference to even have a leadership race? Maybe even have it in the new year?
No, I don't think we should wait till the new year.
No, OK.
I think that we can use the conference as a platform for the various contenders to state their case, as we did in 2005.
Yeah.
And that got a lot of interest. And then have the ballot of members after that, so that we're running it into November time. That seems to be a sensible timetable. And Party Board have yet to decide all this. I very much hope that they adopt that approach.
What do you make of Suella Braverman arguing that the Conservatives risk becoming centrist cranks? Are you a centrist crank?
Where I am is on the common ground of British politics. I've always been a pragmatic Conservative who wants to lead this country and reflect the best of our nation. That's what Conservatives should be doing, but who also listens to people. You know, we lost votes in this election to Reform, to the Lib Dems,
But
to
why?
Labour.
Because you weren't right-wing enough?
No, because I think people didn't think we were competent enough.
And you didn't honour your 2019 manifesto pledges.
I think a lot of the problems stem from that. I think, you know, certainly in my work, I was honouring those pledges and working even through COVID. And I think that, you know, it would have been good for everybody to have really focused rigorously on what was a very good manifesto in 19 and been able to show that we delivered it, just like Margaret Thatcher always used to talk about delivering her manifestos. Now, if we get back to that competence, people are going to say, yes, we're going to give you time to govern again.
But then do you need a Thatcherite-style leader? I mean, because it's somebody clearly with... Like, you've worked, for instance, with Priti Patel at the Home Office. I think you've also worked quite closely with Robert Jenrick.
Yes.
You worked with Kemi Badenoch when she was in Cabinet at the same time as you. Yeah. You know all these people quite well. So who are you thinking could inspire confidence, could unite the party again?
Look, I work with all these people. They're all good colleagues, and you know, I think all of them. Priti, you mentioned, I worked very well with her. Yes. You know, a good relationship. We worked extremely well. We're from different traditions as a Conservative Party, but we came together, and I think we made Justice and the Home Office teams much stronger because of that. You mentioned others like Robert and Kemi. You know, they're all people who I recognise as good Conservatives who don't just care about the party, but care about the country.
I know that you haven't mentioned Braverman in that group.
Well, look, what I want to see, I think, from Colin, and that does include Suella as well, is a sense that now is the time, actually, to stop talking and to start listening to why it is
Has
that
she
so
been
many
just
people...
shooting her mouth off too much?
Well, look,
come on.
My advice is... Well, do you remember Harold Lasky, the lefty activist, was told 70 years ago by Clement Attlee that a period of silence would now be appropriate.
Right.
That might be a good thing, not just for Suella, but for all colleagues who seem to think they've got a very quick and glib solution to what is a mother of all problems. You know, I lost to Labour.
Maybe Suella should just defect to Reform.
Oh, look, look, what I'd say to all colleagues is that, you know, you're elected as Conservatives. To be fair, I think it's a statement to say this. You're elected as a Conservative, you serve as a Conservative. And if you have a serious problem and go, then you should have a by-election, you know, in order to test the view of your constituents. But, you know, the reasons why people deserted us were very clear to me on the doorsteps in that 6-week campaign. They just didn't think we were up to the job anymore. Now, that's something that we've got to change. That's going to take a long time. Instead of looking at the personalities, let's look at the values that underpin the Conservative Party.
But who should be leading those conversations? There's another story in the papers today. I think it's the likes of Michelle Dolan and Lucy Fraser and others, yourself included. I think you're in one of the photographs.
Oh,
you know,
right.
Let former Tories into the conversation. Let people who lost their seats also have the intellectual discussions behind the scenes as to the direction of travel for the Conservatives. I mean, are you currently part of the conversation? Who's leading the conversations? How's it, or is it just all still everyone's taking, just about taking the tin hat off?
I think it's only 2 weeks since this electoral defeat, so let's all just dust ourselves down. I certainly
You're emerging from the rubble of Tory-geddon.
Well, indeed, you know, and I've been a member now. It'll be 40 years next February that I've been a member of the Conservative Party.
Wow.
I'm a lot older than I look, Camilla.
You're so baby-faced.
but, you know, I care about the party. Why do I care about the party? Because I believe the Conservative Party, at its best, reflects the best values of Britain. And, you know, when we serve the nation and put the nation first, we're unbeatable. That's what we lost, and that's what we need to understand.
Do you feel any frustration towards Rishi Sunak, Oliver Dowden and the others that orchestrated what was a disastrous election campaign, let's be honest, went too early, and then there they are, happy in their seats with their shadow ministerial positions, and here you are, Robert Buckland, out, no longer serving the good people of Swindon. That must be frustrating, that the people who orchestrated this shower are still in their jobs and you're not.
Of course, I'm frustrated. To be fair to Rishi, he rang me within hours.
Did he? What did he say?
Well, look, we had a proper conversation. I'm not going to reveal the full detail, but the tone was absolutely right. And look, I said...
Did he take responsibility?
Yes, he did. And of course, in his concession
speech...
Sorry? Yes, he did. And I think that the tone, the approach that he's taken is absolutely the right one.
Do you think he phoned everybody?
I don't know. I'm sure he's phoned... I know he's phoned a lot of people, and I think, you know, he's doing what is absolutely right, and I pay absolute tribute to him for doing that. Yes, the timing was wrong. You know, in my view, we should have gone later. I think we should have gone in the autumn. You know, all the advice had been to go long, hold your nerve, and see the economy pick up.
Green shoots.
However, I would say this: I don't think we can just say, "Oh, it's the timing that caused it, and it's one person or Oliver or whatever."
Although D-Day didn't help.
That didn't help. There are a myriad of things. The seeds of this disaster were sown a long time ago, and you know that's something we've all got to now own up to and acknowledge and learn from.
So, Robert Buckland, thank you very much for joining me this morning, being so candid in your thoughts about the future of Conservatism. I think we will be having more conversations with you in the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be joined by Sarah Elliott, who's the spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK, chatting about the attempt on Donald Trump's life and, of course, Biden and what his digging in of his heels means for the US presidential election. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Well, it was quite a damp start to the weekend, but it is going to be turning brighter through today and it is going to be feeling fresher too. Plenty of cloud to start across the south and southeast and a few drips of drabs of rain and drizzle, but it is generally an improving picture across the country. A few showers feeding into western Scotland through the day and a bit of a different story across Northern Ireland as we see this next area of rain move through. So quite a damp afternoon on offer here. But otherwise, plenty of sunny spells around, and where you do catch the sunshine, it will still be feeling pleasant and warm, but not quite as warm as it has done the last couple of days. Now through into the afternoon, we will still see a feed of showers move into western and northern parts of Scotland, but there'll be plenty of late evening sunny spells in between these. Across Northern Ireland, as I say, quite a wet afternoon here, so not really seeing much of that sunshine at all really, but plenty of dry spells across the north of England and elsewhere across central and southern areas of the country. Perhaps a bit more cloud across Wales. Once again, the odd spot of rain and drizzle here, mainly around hills, but otherwise plenty of dry weather to end the weekend. Now through into Sunday evening, the rain that's across Northern Ireland will push north-eastwards and later on feed into parts of Wales and the southwest. So quite cloudy and turning quite damp overnight. The driest and clearest of the weather is going to be in the far southeast corner, and that's where it'll feel a little bit cooler. But elsewhere, we're expecting another one of those muggy nights ahead. So for Monday then, quite a damp start across parts of Scotland, northern England and parts of Wales too. But it is generally an improving picture as that rain turns showery through the course of the day. But these showers could turn quite heavy across Scotland and be quite slow moving, so some persistent downpours at times. But generally drier and brighter across the south. And looking at those temperatures, it will still be feeling pleasant where you catch the sunshine.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Let's move from domestic to international politics now. I'm joined by Sarah Elliott, who is the spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK. Going to have a chat about Donald Trump and all things US election related. Lovely to see you, Sarah. Thanks for coming into the studio. Let's talk about the assassination attempt. I mean, what are we now, a week on from it? Still staggering to watch the footage, frankly. But what impact do you think it's had on the election race so far?
Well, it's definitely rallied the party around him. The RNC convention, which just ended this week, was one of the best conventions in attendees' recollections, saying that it was like 2004. It had this really unified, we're going to go get them, we feel the wind at our backs, we're going to win mentality. Very different than 4 years ago. It also slowed down the conversation on will Biden step down or will Biden not. All this talk about replacing Joe Biden stopped for several days, but now it's ramping back up again, even with rumors that this weekend it would be announced he was stepping down.
Yes.
So
he's meant to have been tapped on the shoulder by Barack Obama, tapped on the shoulder by Nancy Pelosi. I mean, I think it's probably ultimately down to his wife, Jill, to tap him on the shoulder. We've had meetings at Camp David with Biden family members, and yet he's absolutely digging his heels in, which presumably isn't that troubling for Trump. Doesn't Trump just want him to stay in place for as long as possible? Because any replacement is likely to do better in the polls.
This is true. However, the most likely replacement is Vice President Kamala Harris. And she polls about just the same as Joe Biden against Donald Trump, and in some cases worse. So I think Donald Trump is very happy to take on either of those two candidates. If you put someone in like Governor of Pennsylvania, swing state, Josh Shapiro, who's a very popular Democrat, he doesn't have the name recognition. He's not well known to people. If you put someone in like Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California, well, he's quite left-wing. He's, California has a reputation across the United States. So you come into all these different problems, which of course the Democrats have wanted to avoid. And so they've just kept pushing Joe Biden along as the nominee. Now, he hasn't stepped down yet. And they're talking about doing a virtual roll call vote to solidify him as the nominee before the convention. But we'll see what happens. We could have mini primaries. We could have an open convention. We could have a brokered convention, or we could have a contested convention, all in August for the Democrats.
What's your analysis of Joe Biden and his health? I mean, everybody's got an opinion on it. We just had Aubrey Allegretti in to do the papers, and he, to be fair, was in the Oval Office with Biden and Starmer and said one-on-one he seemed fine. But then, of course, that was predicated by the NATO summit where he confused Zelensky for Putin. So It's tricky. What's your analysis of what's actually going on with him individually and then the advice he's getting?
Well, it's obvious he's not the same man as 4 years ago. There has been obvious decline. And the fact that there has been a Parkinson's doctor that has visited the White House 8 times over the past several years is an indication that something neurologically might be wrong.
Although, of course, the White House spokeswoman said, no, he's in because he's analysing everybody in the White House and don't read too much into it. Then his own physician has said, you know, he's cognitively sound.
I don't know how they can keep saying that based upon the debate performance and other, you know, international displays of confusion.
But do you think there is a number of Democrats, we've heard about the Democrats who have said, look, come on, enough's enough. But are there just a number of Democrats in there just still willing him to continue, presumably in a vain hope that he might still beat Trump, which is odd because if you look at the polling for all of those key swing states, those 6 different states where basically they decide who the president is going to be, I think Trump is now ahead by anything from 1 to 6 points if you take, say, Nevada as being where he's most popular.
Yes, I mean, he is getting out of the margin of error in these swing states. Granted, it's 4 months to Election Day. That's a lifetime in U.S. politics or in politics in general. I mean, just think about what's happened in the last 2 weeks. And if they did replace Biden, I mean, then those numbers go out the window and you have a whole new set of polling you have to go through. But it is one of those situations where I think the Democrats have just wanted to win, and they feel like Joe Biden is the only candidate that can beat Donald Trump. But they know, looking at the June 27th performance, he's not going to last 4 years. And it's not fair to the Democrats and the Democratic primary, and it's not fair to American voters.
Might not be fair to Mr. Biden either, to be fair.
Yes, and that is a key point. Actually, most Americans are feeling that this is elder abuse. Yeah. And they need to, out of respect for him as a human being, they need to step
also,
on the
his
side.
legacy before, you know, he started slowing down and making these gaffes was pretty good, and now it's being overshadowed by these more recent years of difficulties. Can we just talk about David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, because he's obviously made some extremely choice remarks about Trump, including describing him as sort of a Nazi white supremacist and saying that he wouldn't have passed his GCSEs and all sorts of other insults. If Trump wins, should David Lammy actually stand down? Because how is he going to have a relationship with the US president?
No, I don't think David Lammy should step down. And he has changed his tune. And he's made great overtures in Washington, D.C. and in the United States and to the Trump campaign.
And to J.D. Vance, the newly sort of chosen one to be vice president.
Yes.
They've got a similar backstory because they're both a bit rags to riches.
Yeah.
But it's a bit rich, isn't it, saying that now? I mean, apart from Sadiq Khan in this country, he's been the most vocal opponent to Trump. And made really personal barbs. I mean, how would Trump take that, do you think? If he has to be in a room with him come December 2024, what happens?
Well, I mean, if Donald Trump can forgive J.D. Vance for being a never-Trumper and saying these things, then I think he can extend the grace to David Lammy, who is the Foreign Secretary of our best ally. And let's face it, Labour won, hands down, a huge majority. Donald Trump will have to respect the electoral outcome of this country. And he has David Lammy has shown that he wants to be a diplomat.
So maybe he should be diplomatic and apologise. Would that be an idea, Sarah?
I'm sure Donald Trump would welcome that.
Yes.
But everybody should probably just look to the future and move on.
And before I let you go, let's have a little chat about who might be the ambassador to the US, because I think the Tories had their pick. Starmer came in and said, I'm sorry, you'll have to do something else because we want to choose our own person. A couple of names being thrown about. Peter Mandelson, former close advisor and minister under Blair, and indeed David Miliband, again, somebody closely associated with Labour politics in this country. Any view on that? I mean, is it important who we appoint? Not least if we have to bridge a gap between Republican thinking and Labour thinking.
Exactly. No, it's very important, actually. And David Miliband spent a lot of time in the United States. He might be a good choice. I just feel like these choices quite harken back to 20 years ago.
Yes.
Could we get some fresh Labour thinking and blood in the mix? You know, people who maybe have more of a less of a globalist worldview. The Republicans right now are actually very much Labour focused in the sense Republicans. They had the president of the Teamsters Union speak at the Republican National Convention. Maybe less progressive people and more people who are focused, more traditional Labour representative would work better with these Republicans.
Maybe Nigel Farage of this para.
Well, there you go.
Could be a conduit, do you think? Just very, very quickly, Sarah, so we're running out of time.
I think he would be very useful, yes.
All right. Good to know. Sarah Elliott, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. This story will run and run, and we'll keep you updated with it on GB News, because I think everyone is slightly on Biden watch right now. So stay tuned to the telly and the radio. Right, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to Michael Portillo about what he's got coming up on his show at 11, and Maureen Callahan joins me. A bit more US politics, but this time talking about the Kennedys. Stay tuned.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Khloe Kardashian has come under fire after posting a picture of her 6-year-old daughter wearing a full face of makeup.
Yeah, the reality TV star said the youngster was participating in a dance recital and that wasn't an everyday occurrence.
So this morning we're asking, is it ever okay to let children wear makeup?
Well, joining us now is journalist Julie Cook. So, Julie, it's a child wearing full rouge, bright red lipstick, hair tied back, looking very, very stylised, very much, I think, like a young adult. Is this really the sort of thing we should be doing with small children?
Oh, I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, first of all, in Khloe Kardashian's case, it was a dance recital, so it was very much a kind of performance element to it. She said herself in her post, it wasn't something they do every day. She was taking part in a dance activity. So, you know, I think she's vindicated on that front. But I've let my daughter play with makeup since she was 3. When she was 3, she showed a distinct interest in my makeup palettes, going through my stuff. She's 10 now, and while I don't let her wear a full face like a drag queen, I do let her wear, you know, a bit of mascara on a weekend if she wants to. I don't see any harm in it.
Clearly, if you're a child of a Kardashian who's paid millions of dollars to endorse cosmetics, you know, that's part of the fabric of their family. My concern, though, Julie, is putting those pictures on social media where people can see them. We live in an age now where, you know, wrong-uns are scouring the internet all the time.
A lot of girls do enjoy putting makeup on. It's almost like a self-expression thing. It's like painting on a canvas. They're just trying to be a bit artistic. I don't think it's necessarily as sort of sinister as we're making out. And I think as long as you're not posting pictures everywhere or putting them at risk of harm, I don't see any danger.
The People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Before we get on to the Kennedys and how badly they treated the women in their lives, let's speak to Michael Portillo, whose show is up at 11 a.m. What have you got coming up, Michael? Lovely to see you.
Good morning, Camilla. I've been wondering if Donald Trump wins the election in the United States and forces Ukraine to do a deal with Russia, will we Europeans find ourselves forcing a small country to make peace with an aggressor? Will we be facing a new Munich? That's a question I'm going to be asking. I'm going to be talking to a cellist about what it's like to play with an orchestra and the importance of music in education. Ridley Scott has a new film, Gladiator. It shows a naval battle occurring in the Colosseum in Rome. I want to know, did that actually happen in history? What's the real story behind Gladiator? And I'm going to be looking at putting tequila into food. I'm going to be eating a very delightful tequila fruit salad. Cheers.
All right. As long as you're not having tequila salamis, I think that's fair enough. So Michael Portillo up next at 11 a.m. with all of that. Right, let's speak to Maureen Callaghan now. She joins me to discuss her new book, Ask Not, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Lovely to see you, Maureen. I mean, you don't hold back on the Kennedys in this book. The women that they destroyed, just how badly behaved were they?
Oh, Camilla, first of all, thank you for having me. I can't begin to describe this. In Ask Not, which is written sort of like a novel. So the reader is in the hearts and the heads of these women who went through these most extraordinary events. And we're talking everything from rape, murder, to a forcible lobotomy on an otherwise vibrant early 20-something-year-old woman.
I mean, it's just staggering because if you think about their reputation, not just for being kind of glossy, political dynasty, but also the fact that, you know, they're meant to be devout Catholics and behave in a very Christian way. Let's zone in on JFK's relationship with Jackie. I mean, how sort of abusive was it, Maureen?
It was terrible. I mean, and Jackie truly loved him, by the way, for all of the sort of talk that this was an extremely transactional marriage. She truly, truly loved him. She first came very close to divorcing him after he abandoned her when she gave birth to their stillborn daughter. He left her alone in a hospital for over 8 days.
I mean, I don't really know what to say to that. It's been said now, and it's been much written about, obviously he had a string of affairs, most notably with Marilyn Monroe. Was Jackie aware of his extramarital behaviour?
Jackie was aware of his extramarital behavior to a point. She did know about Marilyn Monroe. That was the second time she said she was going to divorce him if he didn't end it, and he did. But she likely did not know about another woman who is in the book, another young woman, a 19-year-old White House intern who on her first day in the secretarial pool was invited up to the White House residence, fed a bunch of drinks. The president throws her onto a bed. Within 3 minutes, unwittingly takes her virginity. And it gets worse from there.
And where did it all stem from? Is this as a result of Joe? Is it kind of a familial sense of entitlement?
Yes. I mean, I sort of posit that the original sins were of the patriarch Joe Sr. His two sins were personal and political. The political sin was as U.S. ambassador to Britain, aligning himself with Adolf Hitler. The personal was forcibly lobotomizing his otherwise vibrant young daughter, Rosemary, very likely because he was sexually molesting her and he needed to keep her quiet.
And at the time, was all of this covered up? I mean, you've uncovered it now, but what's the attitude been actually when you've got about your research? Because obviously since the assassination, JFK particularly has been placed on a pedestal, you know, slightly beyond reproach. And you're digging out such uncomfortable truths about the family.
Yes, this is very much a post-Me Too reconsideration of American history. And I really think it is long, long overdue. It extends into the now. We have RFK Jr. as a third-party spoiler in the election for the next president of the United States. So this is a living history that is very much with us, and these women are owed their absolute reconsideration in history and the culture.
Although, doesn't it worry you, Maureen? I mean, the next US president, if he serves another term, and that's looking increasingly likely because of Joe Biden's frailty, and indeed the assassination attempt on his life last week appears to have emboldened his position in the polls. I mean, Trump isn't exactly somebody who's got a great reputation with women. Is this something to do with the office that some of the presidents hold? We also know the checkered history of Bill Clinton, obviously, and Monica Lewinsky.
And by the way, not for nothing, Joe Biden has a similar history. You know, his daughter recently acknowledged in court papers in the U.S. that her diary, in which she wrote about inappropriate showers with her father as a young girl and her fears that she had been molested, are ignored by the mainstream media. In the book, in the opening of the book, I say that also Trump's behavior with women, the Access Hollywood tape, the grab them by the pee tape, appalls and horrifies as it should. This is not a partisan book. It's not a political book. It is a book on the side of women and victims. And I think, to your point, Camilla, Americans and all people in any democracy would do well to be extremely skeptical of anyone who wants that amount of power.
A final thought, Maureen, on Jackie Kennedy. I mean, she went on to marry Onassis. He didn't treat her very well either.
He did not. He did not. He actually struck her. He abused her. He humiliated her. The readers of this book will meet three distinct Jackies: the perfect first lady of the 60s, the trophy wife of the 70s, and the incredibly unexpected turn for Jackie, my favorite Jackie, of the 80s and beyond, who reinvented herself as a single working woman in New York City. Her life took the most unexpected and radical turn there was.
Maureen, thank you so much for filling us in on your new book, Ask Not: The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Thank you. Sounds fascinating. Well, tune in next week from 9:30 on Sunday, because you'll have another 90 minutes of punchy politics then. And don't forget that Michael Portillo isn't doing Tequila Slammers, but he almost is. And he's up next at 11. But first, here's a little weather update. Check whether you need a hat when you go out. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Well, it was quite a damp start to the weekend, but it is going to be turning brighter through today and it is going to be feeling fresher too. Plenty of cloud to start across the south and southeast and a few drips of drabs of rain and drizzle, but it is generally an improving picture across the country. A few showers feeding into western Scotland through the day and a bit of a different story across Northern Ireland as we see this next area of rain move through. So quite a damp afternoon on offer here. But otherwise, plenty of sunny spells around, and where you do catch the sunshine, it will still be feeling pleasant and warm, but not quite as warm as it has done the last couple of days. Now through into the afternoon, we will still see a feed of showers move into western and northern parts of Scotland, but there'll be plenty of late evening sunny spells in between these. Across Northern Ireland, as I say, quite a wet afternoon here, so not really seeing much of that sunshine at all really, but plenty of dry spells across the north of England and elsewhere across central and southern areas of the country. Perhaps a bit more cloud across Wales. Once again, the odd spot of rain and drizzle here, mainly around hills, but otherwise plenty of dry weather to end the weekend. Now through into Sunday evening, the rain that's across Northern Ireland will push northeastwards and later on feed into parts of Wales and the southwest, so quite cloudy and turning quite damp overnight. The driest and clearest of the weather is going to be in the far southeast corner, and that's where it'll feel a little bit cooler, but elsewhere we're expecting another one of those muggy nights ahead. So for Monday then, quite a damp start across parts of Scotland, northern England and parts of Wales too, but it is generally an improving picture as that rain turns showery through the course of the day. But these showers could turn quite heavy across Scotland and be quite slow moving, so some persistent downpours at times, but generally drier and brighter across the south. And looking at those temperatures, it will still be feeling pleasant where you catch the sunshine.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
£30,000 in cash has to be won. It's our biggest cash prize so far and it could be yours. Charles was a winner. Listen to what he says about winning the Great British Giveaway.
I'm Charles. I'm on £18,000 cash. It was just amazing, and as soon as it goes into your bank account, it just changed. It's a life-changing thing.
The next big winner could be you, with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win.